This lecture is on monopolies. You probably heard that word before. Maybe you played the board game. And so you probably know a little bit about this already. So let's take a look.
A monopoly market is at the opposite end of the market structure spectrum from perfect competition. A monopoly is a market with only one producer. While governments often supervise monopolies, the sole producer has control over price. The main decision for the consumer is whether or not to participate. Monopoly markets and perfect competition do have one thing in common: efficiency. While a large number of producers maximize efficiency in pure competition, a natural monopoly is a market that is most efficient when only one producer exists. For example, local utilities such as water, electricity, and natural gas are delivered directly to our homes, schools, and businesses through expensive infrastructures. Duplicating those systems would be cost prohibitive. Even if allowed, no firm would try to compete. Natural monopolies usually have huge startup costs, but they benefit from economies of scale over time. Industries with economies of scale continue to recapture their initial investments as sales units increase. The average cost per unit always decreases with more units sold. Without economies of scale, the average cost rises when output exceeds a certain level. Governments can create monopolies that benefit society as a whole. The U.S. Patent and Trademark Office can assign special licenses or patents to firms to encourage new markets. For instance, pharmaceutical companies research and develop drugs that can improve lives, but the costs to develop the drug are high. Patents protect the holder from competition for a period of time, during which no other producer can make or sell the drug. The patent holder can set the price high because they are the only seller in the market. This allows the firm to recapture the initial research costs. In addition to medicines, patents can encourage the development of such products such as agricultural seeds, alternative energies, and synthetic materials. Some people argue that this system is unfair to those who can't afford the product, but many feel patents encourage scientific research and discovery and are responsible for many of the new technologies and materials that grow our economy and enhance our lives. Without the protection from competition, businesses would not risk the investment and the products would not exist. Now, over time, the price of patented products decreases as the seller tries to increase demand. After the patent expires, competitors can enter the market and drive down the price further. Monopolies are an exception in our free market economy and are only allowed to operate when the benefits outweigh the drawbacks. Governments regulate these exceptions to ensure that their practices are safe and their rates are fair. The US government prohibits monopolies that try to gain absolute control over resources or products when that monopoly prevents healthy competition. Government agencies such as the Federal Trade Commission and the Securities and Exchange Commission watch for unlawful monopoly activity. Now, what type of monopoly might be considered harmful to the economy?
Okay, something to ponder there as we pull up the slides here. Okay, as always, I like to look at the picture and see what this has to do with the topic. This is a picture of Major League Baseball, right? And what you see here is the Texas Rangers, right? The league, the Major Baseball League, is a monopoly. The government is protecting them, saying, okay, you guys get to decide which cities get a team, right? And which ones don't. So if I wanted to start a team, say I was a billionaire, like had enough money to start my own baseball team, and I wanted to start one in Santa Rosa, I couldn't just build a stadium and then, buy my players and start a team. The league is not going to let me do that, and they're not going to provide the opponents for us to play. My team will be, if I had the money, I could probably get the players, I could build the stadium, but I'm not going to be able to play the other teams. So I'm cut out of the business, right? And so that's a monopoly that the government has gone ahead and given the the sports leagues, right? And MLS, the soccer league, operates the same way, right? Sacramento wants to have an MLS team, right? They've got the Sacramento Republic out there, which is a professional soccer team, but they are on the waiting list to get that MLS team, right? Because there's other cities that also want the teams, and the league gets to decide who gets them and who doesn't. Okay, the learning objectives for today are to describe the characteristics and give examples of monopolies. Describe how monopolies, including government monopolies, are formed. Explain how a firm with a monopoly makes output decisions, and explain why monopolists sometimes practice price discrimination. The key terms: monopoly, that's what we're talking about, right? One company controls a market, right, for an item or good or service. Economies of scale, that's when things get cheaper the more you make them, and we'll see that. Natural monopoly is going to be for a product or service that just naturally, the way it's set up, the way it's produced or distributed, makes the monopoly just the best way when you have a free market system to run it, right? It's just, and naturally is a monopoly. An example of this is like the power company, right? The PG&E, gas and electric, right? It's just natural for that to be a monopoly and not to have different companies providing those services, because there are only so many, the infrastructure, the gas lines, the power lines, they only exist for basically one company. So you'd have to set up whole new infrastructures for these different companies, and it just doesn't work out. So that's a natural monopoly. A government monopoly is when the government actually sets regulation or laws to protect monopolies. And the most oftentimes it's going to be because of patents, right? So the government gives a patent to a company to produce a certain product or good and says, you are exclusively able to do this. Nobody else is legally authorized to make this product or good, right? That's what patents do, right? And patents usually are good for a period of time, like 20 years. And patent, that's the next word. Franchise is when a company is given the exclusive rights to distribute a certain good or service within a geographical area, right? So if you think about Subway sandwiches, right? That's actually a franchise type of company. And we're going to talk about different types of company, I think, later in this class. But when you have a franchise company, and some of the businesses we see out there, like Subway sandwiches, is a franchise. What they do is anybody that wants to start a Subway would go to the company, right, the corporation Subway, and they would say, I want to start a company, Subway, in this neighborhood, in this city. And then Subway, the corporation, would say yes or no. And by the way, when they say yes or no, if they say yes, you have to have the money to start that company up. So I think for a lot of businesses, we're talking like a couple $100,000. And that might be in loans or whatever, but you have to have that money when you come to the table, right? So that's one version of franchise, right? If I started a Subway here in my neighborhood, at the nearest building, the commercial building, then I would be a franchisee, right? And Subway is a franchisor, right? It's a type of business. But there's other ways to do franchises too. Like when the government gives a company exclusive rights to sell souvenirs in the national parks, that is that is a form of a franchise. The government is saying only company A can sell keychains and bumper stickers and whatever at Yosemite National Park, right? That whole store, that whole gift shop, all the products sold there are one company, right? Because otherwise it just wouldn't be feasible. If they made it open to everybody, there's not enough business there to bring in a lot of different products. But you give one company sole exclusive rights to it, and now it becomes profitable for that company to bring in all these different souvenirs, right? And then we have license. So that the way franchises are set up is through licenses. And then we have price discrimination. Price discrimination sounds illegal, right? It sounds bad, right? And it's not necessarily good in some cases for some people, but it's not illegal. They do it all the time. If you think about the way companies charge different groups of people different prices, that's price discrimination. Okay. So think about like when we used to go to the movies before COVID-19, right? There were different prices, right? There's the kids price, and then the regular price, and then probably a senior's price for senior citizens, right? So the kids and the senior citizens get to pay less. Also, if you went to a matinee, if you went during the day, you could pay less. But if you went at night, you had to pay more, right? That's price discrimination when you're actually discriminating on the time or the age or whatever it is, and changing the price, right? Market power. Market power is when a company is so big that if they decide to change the price of a product, every other people in the market will also change their product price. So an example of this would be maybe I'm thinking maybe what's a good example of this? Who has a lot of power in the marketplace? Think of products and services. Can you think of a company that has a lot of power? I'm pulling up the chat just in case somebody has. Well, let's look at the products that are out there. My initial thought was Starbucks, but then I don't really know if they have as much power as I initially thought. So I'm thinking I'm trying to think of a company that has even more power. Amazon. Jasmine says Amazon. And I would say Amazon has a significant amount of power. That's actually a really good example, because if you want to buy something online, there's no substitute for Amazon, right? So they can pretty much set the price, right? If they say that these pens, right? What are these pens? Z grips, right? These Z grip zebra pens, right? Medium point. If they say that these are going to cost 50 cents a piece, guess what? The other companies that sell them, whether it's Staples online, Walmart online, Target online, they're probably going to have to get in line with the Amazon price, right? And start selling them for right around the same price. They can't sell them for more, or they're not going to sell that many. So that's market power. All right. Good example, Jasmine. Thanks for saving me on that. Characteristics of a monopoly. Okay. Unfortunately, you've been diagnosed with a rare and serious infection. Your doctor prescribes a 10-day supply of new medication. At the pharmacy, you discover that the medicine costs $97.35, nearly $10 per pill. There are no substitutes, so you buy the medicine. Later, you learn that only one company has the right to produce that drug. The company says that the revenue from the medicine pays for the research and the development costs of producing it. This is a monopoly, right? And we see this a lot with drug manufacturers. When they create a new drug, right? Why do you think these companies are spending millions and billions of dollars on trying to get a vaccine for COVID-19, right? Whoever does basically has an exclusive selling right, right? It's like guaranteed, um, you know, extreme profit, right? Because everybody needs it and they have an exclusive right, right, on the medicine. They can charge as much as they want, right? So that's a monopoly. And that's a monopoly set up by the government, right? I mean, they're the ones saying there's a patent on it. And that's why if you live in San Diego, like my parents do, or somewhere close to the border of Mexico or Canada, when you have to buy an expensive drug medication, if it's expensive here, you can sometimes drive over to Mexico or to Canada and you can get it for much cheaper, right? Because the patent is here in the United States, right? And so they can have sometimes get around those patents in different countries, right? Characteristics of monopoly. Some scientists believe the average cost of developing a new drug to be about $1 billion. High development costs such as these are barriers to entry and can lead to monopolies. It's not just the startup costs, though. It's also the patents that we talked about, right? So the reason they do patents, the reason the government gives a company an exclusive right to produce a drug that could be a life-saving drug, right, is because companies are not going to do the research and development if it costs them $1 billion if they know they can't make their money back. So by having the patent laws, the government is guaranteeing that these drug companies are going to make their money back. And then they're going to make more than this, right? We know that. Okay, characteristics of monopoly. This is the same graphic we saw when we were looking at pure competition, right? The first row here is the number of firms. In pure competition, we had many. In a monopoly, we have one, right? That's kind of the definition of a monopoly, right? One firm. In pure competition, we had a variety of goods, none. And over here, we have a variety of goods, none. So an apple is an apple is an apple, right? The goods are going to be the same. And for like a medical drug, you know, if it's a COVID vaccine, it's going to be the same, right? Barriers to entry. This is where we differ again from pure competition, because of pure competition, we had no barriers. Here we have complete barrier. Why do you think it's a monopoly? The startup costs are high. That's a barrier to entry. There's patents. That's another barrier to entry, right? And then over here, control of prices. In a pure competition scenario, we had no control, right? The companies had no control over the prices. But here, the company has total control, complete control, right? They get to choose how much they're going to sell the product for because they're the only ones that can sell it. They have total market power. And the question here is, what are some barriers to entry that might allow a monopoly to exist? Go ahead and put your answer in the chat. What are some barriers to entry that might allow a monopoly to exist? I don't know why I'm having trouble saying that word. Yeah. Monday morning blues. Okay. What do you think? Yeah, so patent and expensive startup costs, right? Those are two barriers to entry. Okay, here's economy of scale. Somebody mentioned it the last slide, but here's what it looks like on a graph. Okay, a lot of companies look like this, right? They start up. The cost of producing the goods is really high because guess what? They had to pay all the fixed costs. They had to pay for the startup costs, right? As they produce more and more of whatever they're selling, their cost per item goes down, right? As their output goes up, right? But what happens right here? Right here, we see it, the costs start to go up again. Now, what's happening here is, say this is a bakery, right? And you buy your ovens, you buy your racks for your bread. By the way, if anybody's ever worked in a bakery, they know what I'm talking about, but it's one of the best places to work when you have to go there on an early Saturday or Sunday morning, because you get to smell the bread come right out of the oven, and hopefully you get to eat some of that bread, right? Put some butter and some jam on it, some kind of sweet jelly or honey or something. Have that with your coffee. Right? I used to work at a French bakery in college. Cool little job, right? So anyways, you buy all that equipment, you start making bread, and guess what? Your costs, as your output increases, your costs go down because you're selling more and more of this, right? It's getting cheaper and cheaper. But what happens right here? Right here, you basically run out of capacity, right? Your ovens only cook so much bread, right? And there's only so many hours in the day, right? You only have so much space. Everything's scarce, right? So what happens is, if you want to increase your output, you have to invest in more equipment. You might even have to invest in a new location, rent a new area, right? A new building. So that's why the costs go back up. Now, in a business with economies of scale, the more you produce, the cheaper it is, right? It does start to flatten out a bit, but it's never going to shoot back up. It's always just going to get a little cheaper, a little bit cheaper, a little bit cheaper, right? This is an example of economies of scale. So one example that the textbook talks about is, if you have a hydroelectric power plant. A hydroelectric power plant is basically usually a dam that holds the water back, right? Like it'll dam up a river or something, right? And then what they do is they let the water come through an area that turns turbines, and those turbines create electricity, right? And so the startup costs are super expensive, right? You got to build the dam, you got to invest in all this expensive electrical equipment, and batteries perhaps to store the energy. But once you have all that, the more you produce, the cheaper it is, right? Once all the equipment's paid for, it's just cheap. It just gets cheaper and cheaper, right? So that's why, like a hydroelectric dam or company would be one with economies of scale. In the case of a natural monopoly, the government allows the monopoly to form and then regulates it. Okay, so in this case, we're talking about like the PG&E, right? It's a natural monopoly. There's only so much infrastructure. When somebody has control over it and they're providing the electricity and gas to the market, now the government just steps in and says, hey, you can't charge too much, okay? And they do things like that, and that's regulating it. In other cases, however, the government actions themselves can create barriers to entry in a market and thereby create monopolies. A government monopoly is a monopoly created by the government. And we see those with patents, right? When whoever invents this COVID-19 vaccine, right, or drugs, or whatever it is, the government's going to give them a patent and they're going to have a monopoly in that area, right? Here's some examples of different technology devices that were created and they received patents, right? You go all the way back to like the cotton gin, Eli Whitney, right? And all the way forward to the iPhone, right? The ones that kind of stand out for me are the sewing machine, Isaac Singer in 1851. He patented this fast and less expensive sewing machine, right? And today you can still buy a Singer sewing machine, right? They're still making, they have a brand, right? Singer. Of course, the patent has run out, right? The patent ran out a long time ago, and there's other companies that can produce sewing machines, right? But for a while, Singer had a patent. Same thing with TVs, right? Philo Farnsworth invented this electric TV, right? That person had the patent for probably 20 years, but then it expired in 1950. And then RCA and eventually Sony and Samsung and all these companies produce TVs because the patent no longer exists, right? The patent's just for a 20-year period, right? This was one that I didn't know about, this top one, 1970, Corning glass. Now, Corning glass, they make like casserole dishes for your kitchen, right? This is like a regular glass company. I had no idea that they invented what became fiber optic cables, right? Optical fibers, right? Which basically is a way to transmit data in a very fast way. Now we have a lot of our high-speed internet is done by fiber optics, and this is what it looks like. Now, this was 1970 when they came up with this, so their patent has expired as well, right? Hopefully they made a lot of money on it. And then finally, the iPhone, right? The iPhone got their patent in 2008. And that one's probably still valid, right? Because that's less than 20 years ago. All right. Remember when I said that, you know, the government gives a franchise to a producer of souvenirs for the national parks? This is what it looks like. This is Yellowstone National Park. So it grants a franchise. It's a kind of a monopoly so that only that company can sell souvenirs in that gift store, right? Okay, this is an example from the textbook. It talked about this company called Leland. Leland developed a drug called Breathe Deep. Breathe Deep. And this drug basically is something that helps people with asthma, right? And it says here that no matter how much it costs, you want this medicine, right? Because it could be life-saving, um, and it helps asthmatic people significantly, right? So Leland, the company that invented the drug, and they have a patent on it, they could charge a very high price for its new medication. The resulting profit would give the company a reason or incentive for inventing the new medication in the first place. But could Leland sell as much medication as it wanted at whatever price it chose? Well, the answer to the question is no. The government is going to tell them they have to decide, do they want to set the price or do they want to set the output? They can't do both, because otherwise it's not going to provide a stable market for people, right? So a lot of times companies will pick the price, right? They'll say, well, we're gonna charge $10 for this drug, right? But what happens is if they don't have economy of scale, right? We know that yes, $10 if they sell 10,000 units is a good profit, but if they have to go up to 50,000, $10 might be a loss for them, right? So that's why companies often choose output rather than the price, right? So they'll say, you know, we're just going to make 50,000 a year, right? For the next however many years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is. And then they can kind of keep the number the same, and but they can't then change the price, right? The price has to be fixed. So here's what all this patents and high barriers to entry, here's what it does to the prescription drug prices, right? Consumer price index is an index that the government uses to measure inflation, right? So what they do is they pick like I don't know how many hundreds of goods, right? But they pick a variety of goods and say it's like 100 different things, right? It could be pens, it could be phones, it can be automobiles, but they say, okay, we're going to have this, and it's all these different things together, right? And what they do is they use this as their baseline, right? So they picked these things a long time ago. And then they watch the price of those goods and services as time goes on. All those goods and services together create consumer price index. That tells us that the cost of getting of things, right? The cost of goods and services, whether it goes up or whether it goes down. And it mostly goes up, right? And that's what we see here. And that's the orange line, right? The red, orangish line, right? So we can see that when we had the recession, 2008, it went down a little bit, right? But for the most part, it's going up steadily. So what cost, say this index, right, cost $100, right? Or maybe this is $100,000, who knows? But say it's 100, right? And then in 2011 or 2012, it's 110,000. So right there, we know that our money has gotten weaker, right? It used to be we could buy all these things for $100 in 2008. But then in 2012, that same list of things cost us $109 or $110. I think it's probably $9, $109, right? Maybe over here it's $110, right? So what we see there is that $100 we had before will not buy everything that we want, everything on the list, just a few years later, right? The price of things has gone up. And what they do is they figure out how much it went up, and that's inflation, right? Now look at the price of prescription drugs. It used to be it was following the index. But right here in 2008, prescription drugs just keep going up and up and up in terms of the cost, right? What we could buy for $100 in 2007, in 2012 was almost double, right? 170, 175. It was 100 over here. Now it's 175 over here, right? So this is just an example of one problem with monopolies, right? They could charge whatever they want in some cases, right? And so they're not tied to the market, right? The market price, where you have many producers and consumers agreeing on the price, right? They have market control. That's what market control looks like when you talk about cost. And that's why a lot of politicians are talking about prescription drug prices. And that's why a lot of people go to Mexico or Canada to get their prescription drugs. They're just too expensive. They're getting too expensive in the United States. Well, here's what it looks like inside one of those prescription drug factories, right? Very scientific, right? Very clean. Got to even wear gloves and a hairnet, right? A lab coat. A company that has a monopoly on a particular product, such as a new drug, may find that increasing output lowers its marginal revenue. Remember I talked about that with if they don't have economy of scale, sometimes when they increase their output, they're going to lower their marginal revenue, right? And therefore their profit. The previous example assumed that monopolists must charge the same price to all consumers, but in some cases, monopolists may be able to divide customers or consumers into two or more groups and charge different prices to each group. This practice is known as price discrimination, right? We do this at the movie theater, do this at the airlines when they say, tickets cost different prices for different times of the year. We see this in any business that gives a discount to seniors. We see that all the time, right? I think Apple gives a discount to students, to buy computers and phones and gadgets, iPads, right? So this is all forms of price discrimination. Price discrimination, the assumption is different customers will pay different prices for the same product. If you're a business person, you're gonna pay more for that new laptop than a student, right? If you're a senior, you might be on a fixed income. You're probably not going to go around doing everything you want. You're going to have to decide where you're going to spend your limited money, right? So you're looking for the deals, right? I can go to the movies cheaper if it's during the day and I'm a senior. I can go eat at this restaurant early, what do they call it? Early bird special, right? I'm going to do that. And so different people are going to be motivated to save money, by, um, shopping at different times or whatever. Okay, the goal of monopolists, guess what the goal is? If monopolists set the price too high, only some customers will buy the product. If a monopolist set the price too low, monopolists lose profits it could have made from people willing to pay more. Monopolists want to maximize their profits. They do not want to give you the best deal. They want to bring that price up to the highest amount that you're willing to pay for it, right? What they found, though, is that seniors and students, a lot of them aren't willing to pay some of those prices, so they give them discounts, right? So the solution, price discrimination. Different prices are set for different customers by dividing the market into different groups. Doesn't sound fair, does it? But we do it. It's totally legal. Okay, what is this cartoon, this political cartoon, what does it say about the usefulness of price discrimination for airfares? This is an airline, and the advertised very low off-peak rate is for February 29th only. What is the humor saying there? So, as Victor said, February 29th only happens every 4 years, right? It's a leap year. Usually February only has 28 days. So 2020 was a leap year. So the next time you can buy this fare is 2024 on February 29th, right? So the joke here is that sometimes airlines, they'll get you in, they'll say, you could fly anywhere in the United States for $100 round trip. But you go in and then there's all these rules, right? You have to look at, it has to be only in the month of April, and you have to fly on a Thursday and come back on a Tuesday, and it's very specific, right? So that's price discrimination. That's a form of price discrimination. Okay, limits of price discrimination. Significant market power. Companies must have some control over prices for price discrimination to work. If you didn't have some control over the market, right? Think about the Roxy movie theater, right? They have some control, right? There's only so many movie theaters in Santa Rosa. There's also got to be distinct customer groups. You have to be able to divide your customers into distinct groups: students, seniors, regular people, whatever it is. By the way, anytime I go shopping at a place, I usually ask them if they have a veterans discount. Since I'm a veteran, like sometimes places have it, right? And then the next one, difficult resell. The good or service needs to be difficult for the customer to resell. Items that are consumed on the spot, such as museum admission or movie tickets, work best. They don't want something that, like, if you can get the discount, say Apple offered like a significant, their discount's not that good, right? It's like 15% or something, 10 or 15%. But it could cover the taxes at least. But say they offer students a 50% discount. So you're going to pay half. Okay. Now, what do you think students are going to do? They're going to save up. They're going to buy the phones however they can, and they're going to resell them, right? Or the computers or whatever it is, because all these other people who aren't students, they can't buy it except for the regular price. So if you buy it for half, you mark it up, right in the middle of half, like half and full price. You set it right there at 3/4 the regular price. People are going to buy your stuff instead of at the Apple store, right? So that's why the good or service has to be difficult to resell, because otherwise people would just set up their own shops, right? And they buy a bunch and then sell it for cheaper. So movie tickets, museums, airline tickets, because they can check the name, and you can't resell it. They say it's only for your purchase, whatever it is. Those are the things that work best. Okay, let's see how you guys do with this. What do all types of monopolies have in common? What do you think? C, a patent gives a company exclusive right to sell a new good or service for a period of time. Yes, C is the right answer. Good job, Donovan. What happens if a monopolist increases the price of a good? Happens the same for everybody, right? If you increase the price of a good, the only thing we know for sure is we're going to sell less, right? A. It's a law of supply and demand, right? It's built into that. Government intervention may be required, but it isn't always required. Price discrimination can only work if it's going to be D here, right? Firms have to have some control over the price. If you don't have any control over the price discrimination is not going to work out for you. It is not going to work so good. All right, that's it. So you guys did really good with that. I will have the assignment posted later today, hopefully pretty soon.